Hello, hello. Okay, so this is going to seem like a bit of an unorthodox video, but I have a very special guest today. I'm interviewing a real live politician, and I know this wouldn't seem like something that would go on this channel, but as you know, if you watch this channel, I do have a passion for politics, and it just seemed like an opportunity that jumped at me. And Mr. Ian, now please tell me how to pronounce your last name so I don't butcher it.
Sure, it's Schlakman.
Okay, Mr. Ian Schlakman here was kind enough to actually give me this interview, and this is a very big deal for me personally because my dream job is to be a journalist, and not one of the shitty ones. We all know the shitty ones, Mr. Ian. I know you do.
Yeah, no, it's so true.
So yeah, my heroes in the industry are the people that go in and like shake it up. Like Ed Schultz, who got fired from, was it CNN or MSNBC? He got fired from. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think it's MSNBC.
Yeah, like just for trying to cover Bernie and all that stuff. I want to go in and be, like one of them, shake up the establishment. But this is kind of just something that will help me get out my comfort zone, and it's a good opportunity for me, and figured it'd be a fun little thing because I like to educate you guys as well. So,
Awesome.
first, would you like to introduce yourself? He is running for the Green Party nomination for president. So this guy has a genuine chance of having his name on the ballot.
Exactly. No, I'm really glad to be on. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. So we'll start since that is the topic of this channel. He was talking about what kind of nerdy stuff he's into. So he said he liked Dungeons and Dragons and hasn't been into anime in a while. But when you were into anime, what kind of stuff do you like?
Yeah, sure. So, it's sort of older school stuff is what I was introduced to when I was in college. So you're talking like Fooly Cooly, Lupin the Third. Full Metal Alchemist, really into that.
That's one of my top three favorites right there.
Yeah. It's good stuff. I'll leave it for the moment. Yeah, like anything with kind of like a sci-fi bent or a little bit of like a political outlook to it. And like Full Metal Alchemist had a lot of politics in it. Like,
yes, and that's something that we were talking about before I started filming here and I try to push this message through in all of my content on this channel, is that politics, like there are people that don't want to be involved in politics. They say, I'm not interested, I don't care, but like not only is that a very dangerous mentality to have, but politics is everything. Like any story you read, period, is going to have politics like melded into the plot, which is why on the reviews we do do half and half dirty, dumb jokes. But then when I really get down into analyzing, I get into like how this politically kind of coincides with what's happening in real life, because a lot of authors like to use stories in order to make a point and send a message.
Oh yeah. It's absolutely it's in everything. It's in everything. Like if if you go through intro writing classes or creative writing classes, they talk a lot about it. I mean, even like the basic hero's journey, when you start to learn about fiction writing and stuff like that, so much of it is tied to whether or not you're gonna actually advocate or advance an agenda, kind of against whatever the regime of the day is doing. Are you going to speak out and be a truth teller? Are you going to speak out and try to do some good in the world? Or are you just going to let the world kind of pass you by while evil people do whatever they want? So it's in there. It really is.
And that, my friends, is why we respect the Green Party, because the Green Party, even before, because right now Bernie Sanders is kind of the hero of the day, but before Bernie was running for president, the Green Party was there. And they've always kind of been that like lefter than Democrat position, a place where people could vote if they didn't want to hold their nose and vote for the lesser of two evils. I, as a proud Jill Stein voter in 2016, who was pushed to that direction by Jimmy Dore. Yeah, I assume you know Jimmy Dore.
Yeah, big fan.
Yeah, so like, and it was his rant, basically about talking, like, I'm not going to go to the poll and, like, grit my teeth and vote for someone that I don't want to vote for, because that's not what democracy should be, right? This system is broken, and voting for the lesser of two evils constantly is what's breaking it. And people that may not be as educated in politics may not realize this, but it's not just as simple as Republicans bad guys, Democrats good guys. Now, obviously, Democrats are typically better than Republicans, but it's, between, I believe the South Park joke was a douchebag and a turd sandwich.
Yeah, exactly.
So Green Party has always kind of been there as the lefter option, and my personal choice, just being totally transparent here, is I'm supporting Bernie Sanders, but if he is not the nominee, this man that I'm speaking to right now will be getting my vote.
Well, that's cool. I really appreciate that. I think the Green Party is full of idealists, but I think the idealism is rooted in a very real sense that what we're doing right now isn't really working.
Mm-hmm.
So you need a candidate. See, this is something that I really think people kind of missed in the 2016 election, is that people were ready for a change candidate. The
Yeah.
change candidate was what people wanted. They did not feel that even after 8 years of Obama that they were being properly represented. They wanted someone that was going to shake things up and change things. And so I know tons of younger folks, even in my own family, that were like, man, I'm a big Bernie Sanders fan, and you know what? I'm going to vote Trump. And I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like,
That's
what?
crazy.
Why? How on earth would you go there? And he's like, well, Bernie was going to shake it up and be for the little guy, and Trump's obviously going to do that more than Hillary. And I would say something, like that. Man, I mean, like that's why it's so important to have the Green Party on the ballot because, people need to understand that there's more than just two options. If you're really not going to vote, for the Democrat versus Trump, then you really got to look at the Green Party. I mean, that's something that I feel really, really strongly about. I don't want anybody voting, just the opposite, or voting, because you don't like the Democratic nominee. I feel like that's really it's just a poor way to vote. I
It's
think a lot of people
counterproductive.
it's productive, but it's also just doesn't really, you have 4 or 5 options, maybe even, more if you look at the independent candidates running, because there's quite a few. And I personally just feel that, the corporate media has done such a good job of telling you that there's only 2 candidates worth a damn voting for. So either vote for one or the other, and they've kind of stepped on their own message because then folks are like, okay, I can't stand Hillary Clinton, so I'm going to vote for the other guy. I know Trump from reality television. Maybe he won't be that bad as a president. I mean, that was sort of the mentality of a lot of folks that I know that really weren't politically informed going into the 2016 election. And I think the Green Party can play a pivotal role in being like, no, 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 just a little bit more information, and you'd know that there's a libertarian on the ballot and a Green Party person on the ballot, probably in your state. So it's ridiculous for you to think you've got to go vote just for the other person just because you feel like the 2 options that you're being told in corporate media are the only 2 options. That's just not true.
Yeah,
That's
and
just
what a ridiculous concept to assume that the entirety of political opinion in the world, or in this case in this country, can be narrowed down to one side or the other. That's crazy. And I personally think that makes a lot of like the tension that we feel in this country is because the narrative is either you agree with me 100% or you completely disagree with me.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think that's what you're hearing from the mainstream media. It's like, well, even if you don't like the Democrat, if you're watching Fox News, you get the opposite. Even if you like the Republican, you can't possibly vote for the other side. They're crazy, and it's just such a ridiculous narrative. I mean, the idea that there's only 2 ways to go when you're out there voting is just wrong. I mean, so I feel like it's a really important role to be able to say that, there are tons of people that just are not going to vote for the 2 mainstream parties either. Let's just be honest about that. There are people that are just strict anti-war voters. Like if you're a Quaker and you live by that code, that you don't want any kind of war on your hands, no blood on your hands, no violence. Both parties have started war and been involved in war. So you're going to have to vote Green Party because we're one of the few anti-war parties out there, that would not be involved in a war at all. So I mean, there's so many people like that are voting with their conscience, and we want them to have someone to vote for on the ballot, and we don't want them to just vote for the other person just because they feel like, well, only 2 options are going to matter because that's what MSNBC says. We've got to get out of that.
Which is why, by the way, I'm a big proponent of ranked choice voting. I think that would be a marvelous step in the right direction. I assume you're for that.
It would. It's a fantastic idea. We use it internally in the Green Party. We rank our candidates, and then we tabulate the ranked choice voting. It takes a little bit more time than just getting that instant gratification. But what it does is it lets you have a say, even if your first candidate gets knocked off the ballot. So let's say let's say that the Democrats used it, and you're a Tulsi Gabbard person, but your number 2 choice would be Bernie. You'd still get a chance at actually supporting your number 2 candidate. Your vote just wouldn't be. You don't have to go to the poll thinking, well, I couldn't possibly vote for my number 1 choice because they're never going to get there, so I got to vote strategically. Mm-hmm. And those strategic voters, I'm in Baltimore City, right? Baltimore City has an incredibly high homicide rate. It's got generations of poor African Americans and other marginalized folks that just have never really felt the benefits of capitalism. And we hear all the time, well, you got to vote strategically when you get to the voting booth. Well, people have been voting strategically for years, but finally the Green Party is here. We have a presence in Baltimore City now, and we're giving people another option, another way to vote. And we do have some people elected to really local office here in Baltimore City. So that's sort of like my vision. I really want people to start to get used to voting green or seeing greens on the ballot. And even if you're not going to give us that vote when you go up against, the general election, maybe you are a Democrat, then I want you to start thinking down ballot. In my local neighborhood, is my city really best served by the two major parties? Is it time for me to vote locally for a Green? Is it time for me to get involved locally in a Green Party candidate campaign or a socialist candidate campaign? So that's sort of my kind of thinking right there.
So I'm going to lead that into the classic "What got you into politics?" question, and I'll start by talking about my own perspective, and then I'll lead it to you. So along that same vein of the Democrats are barely different than the Republicans, with the exception of social issues.
Right.
What I noticed as a child, middle school, high school, seeing everyone obsessed with politics, I used to be that kind of I don't want to hear about politics. I don't care. I ignored it. And the reason is I never really saw much change. I remember when Obama got elected, and as I think, I'm trying to think, it was 2008. So I was just getting out of middle school, I think. I remember thinking, oh my God, everything's going to change now. It's going to be like a whole new country. And a year, 2 years go by, I'm not seeing much change. Nothing in my family life is changing. Nothing, I appreciated you can stay on your parents' insurance until a little bit later, little things here and there. But as a kid, I was where's that revolution? Where's that big change? And I finally realized it's because both parties take money from the same interests. Both parties are doing the rich and powerful's bidding, and the rich and powerful want the status quo to remain. So that's when I started to look into it, and I found things like Jimmy Dore and Kyle Kalinski's Secular Talk, and right. you find out that the way you get change is by either going to a party like the Green Party, which is outside of the political establishment that would shake things up, or finding someone like Bernie Sanders, who's been a fighter his whole life, someone who you can look through their history. And this is advice number one I will give to everyone. Never judge a politician by what they say. Judge a politician by what they've done their whole life, their voting record.
That's good advice.
So my advice to people is, if you want to see genuine change, it is possible. Don't trick yourself into thinking it's not possible. It's all about getting behind the right candidates. And if there's no good candidates in the mainstream parties, then there's always an option, and that's where the Green Party comes in. Now, I'm curious how if you're coming into politics was similar, or how that went about on your end.
Well, so I self-identified as a socialist, I'd say, back in high school. I had a lot of issues with the way capitalism is set up and the way our world economy is kind of run, and I just felt that socialism was simply a better system. And I could go into why I feel that way if you want, but let me answer your question more directly, because when I moved to Baltimore, I kind of thought what you thought about the Obama years. I thought, this is a city run by Democrats and a state that's mostly Democratic. It's going to be great. It's going to be a utopia. And, Baltimore obviously has a lot of problems. And, so for me, I really got involved politically back in 2014 when I first ran for office. I first ran for Congress against a guy named Dutch Ruppersberger. And Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger is actually one of the most pro-spying, pro-NSA candidates we have in Congress today. And he, so right at 2014...
Is he just open about it? He's like, yes, I think they should be able to.
Oh my God, yeah, it's absolutely atrocious, yeah. So basically, this was around the time that the Edward Snowden leaks happened in 2014. Edward Snowden reveals about FBI and the NSA and the other state agencies spying on citizens unlawfully, right? So Edward Snowden was actually close to being a citizen of Dutch Ruppersberger's district. He was actually born in Dutch's district, and he lived near the district his whole life. So I, famously got to go on stage and debate Dutch, and I got to tell him, your pro-spying policies and your attitude toward Edward Snowden is atrocious. This guy is a citizen in your district, and you completely ignored what he had to say, and you called him a liar, and you should answer for this. And he turned around and retorted to me and said, well, I didn't call Edward Snowden a liar. I called him a traitor because the government should have every right to spy on your citizens. They're always doing what's in the best interest of our people. I mean, it was just kind of, like
Yeah.
it was a pretty interesting moment to actually see someone literally
That
say
brainwashed.
that way. Yeah, and you read this guy, you read his like his Facebook posts and stuff like that, and he is always pro spying. He always thinks the government has a right to do it. He's more, and the man is a Democrat, mind you. Like, I should put that out there. He's a Democrat. He was more gung ho about like making sure they're allowed to spy than most Republicans were. And so finally, after my campaign, the Democrats pulled him off that committee. He was on the House Intelligence Committee, where he got to make a lot of internal behind-the-scenes decisions about how much spying the NSA could do. And they pulled him off of it and put on someone a little more moderate, because this guy was like a 1930s McCarthyist Republican. Like, I was like, felt like he was going to take 2 steps away from outing me as being a socialist or something like that. It throw me off the stage, me in jail. He was really quite crazy with his pro-spying policies. So we never get credit. Like me personally or the Green Party, we're never going to get the credit for getting him off of that committee. But after I ran against him and pointed this out and made his statements public, and talked about them, then all of a sudden he gets kicked off the committee. So that's sort of the way that it is to be an organizer and an activist. Even though I did that when I was running for office, like, an organizer or an activist, and let's say you're trying to like stop, like some folks in Baltimore stopped, like some high school students actually stopped a new incinerator being built around 2016, and these high school kids did a ton of work, marches in the streets, went to the city hall meetings, and of course then the incinerator was never built. The incinerator was called off, and it was a big victory for these kids. But of course, the corporation doesn't say, oh, damn these kids. If it was only for them, we would have built this incinerator. They say, oh, yeah, the bond market went south and the investors blacked out, and it's all.
They never want you to know that you can make a difference. They will do their best to make you disinterested in politics. And that's why I see so many of my friends, very just like, and understandably, I mean, like, I get why people are like, you know what I mean? But like, the sad part is you're playing into the people that, how are you about swear words? Can I swear?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. You're playing into the people that fuck you over's hands, basically.
Exactly.
When you do that, when you're inactive, when you choose not to get involved, all that does is make it easier for them to fuck you over. And that is why I am so gung-ho about trying to get as many people into this process as possible. And I'll use that opportunity to move on. You were talking about describing socialism, right? So that was one of the first things I noticed about your campaign when I clicked on your Twitter page. You proudly, and it's very refreshing to see this, proudly just right in the cover of your thing, socialist, right? So I'm curious, obviously, the mainstream version of this is what Bernie Sanders calls democratic socialism. You are further to the left with saying full-on socialism. So I'd be curious for you to like describe the differences between your version and his version, and like where you go further than him.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. So there's some simple ways to describe it, and then there's some like nuances about the way we use it that I'll kind of get into. But let me start with some of the simpler ways. So basically, the U.S. is a capitalist country, and I think most people know what capitalism means. And McDonald's, hamburger, casinos, like anything you could think of would be considered capitalism, pretty much in our state. We do have some like what would be considered socialist institutions, like your library, your fire department, anything that's like state-run, state-controlled would be considered socialist. Now, here's why I'm a socialist. I feel that I have a better opportunity to influence my library. Like, I could go to a city council meeting and tell folks there, hey, I want my library to do this. Or I could go talk to a librarian and ask them to do something. If I have a big company down the street from me that's polluting, and I go knock on their door and say, "Hey, Mr. Polluter, can you please stop?" They would laugh in my face and say, "This is my private property. I'm going to pollute all day."
Yeah, and I'll call the police and get you kicked out.
So that's sort of the fundamental reason why I'm a socialist versus a capitalist.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to just bring up is the difference between me and Bernie. So I'm a full disclosure. I'm a member of the DSA. I've been an active member of the DSA for a long time. That's the Democratic Socialist of America. That's the organization that is affiliated with Bernie. They have a
I've volunteered with them.
Yeah. I got their endorsement even as a Green, so they do endorse Green Party candidates once in a while.
Oh, nice.
And then I was on their National Electoral Committee, and I've recently been a less active with them, and so the the DSA, so this is where it gets a little complicated, right? And I think it's really important for your audience to know that like these terms change all the time. Like these terms change constantly. And yeah, it's confusing. And it just is the way it is, right? I mean, communism used to mean something else, socialism used to mean something else. Things are just different. And if you go into Europe, like things are very different there. I mean, socialism is considered more centrist in Europe because most countries have more socialism in them. And so what Bernie is talking about is kind of like Nordic socialism, which we socialists, and I guess you could say Marxist, kind of refer to as reform socialism. So that's when you want to take a system like the US and just add socialist policies. So you want to make a really big tax on rich people, like that's a Bernie Sanders policy. You want to expand public housing, like that's a Bernie Sanders policy. Like so, some of his policies are really good, but what they essentially would do is they would reform socialism. They would reform the capitalist state to be more socialist. And that's sort of a tamer version of socialist than kind of what I'm calling for, and a lot of other like Marxists, what I say, would call for, which is revolutionary socialism. So revolutionary socialism is basically when you say the current system as it stands right now, like in the U.S., is not working at all. There's a ton of poor people. There's a ton of pollution. The system is breaking down. We just came out of a recession. We might go into another recession. It's just not working out. So we should completely try to change it as quickly as possible into full socialism, meaning the state would actually guarantee certain things that the current economy is supposed to do. So, for example, like if I want to get a house, I have to go talk to either a landlord and pay rent, or I've got to go buy a house from, and get a bank involved. And like in full socialism, the state would help you get a house. Like the state would say, here's houses in your area that are vacant. Do you want to move into this one? It's sort of like that simple. It's more about having a right, an actual right to the things that you need to survive. So think about food, think about shelter, think about even clothing. I mean, do you have a right to any of these things, or do you have to buy all these things? And if you don't buy them, you kind of don't live. You kind of die. Like that's sort of what we say when we want revolutionary socialism. We want to revolutionize the economy immediately to make it full socialism.
So I'm glad you brought up that having a right thing, because like again, I keep going back to this notion of like what I thought as a child growing up, because I feel like the world we live in, it wants to like stomp out those like ideas of like, why isn't the world better? And then adults or the system will be like, it just has to be this way, right? Because as a kid too, I remember thinking, that's weird that you have to like pay for food. You need that to survive, like it's just, but like obviously you grow up and it's like, that's just how it is, right? And as I grew up more, I went down the stubborn path and I was like, no, that's not just how it is. There's a reason that it is the way it is, and people in power choose to make it that way, because if there's a way to make a buck off of it, someone in power will do that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so this is a really interesting time for us to be alive, because a lot of these terms are sort of being turned on their head. Like the Trump administration is going to define human rights very differently than you or I would. I mean, they would define like.
Didn't he just get rid of the clean water thing?
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's stuff like that.
Insane.
I mean,
Like, how the hell does someone spin that to like, yep, I'm the good guy because I got rid of the Clean Water Act?
I mean, it goes beyond that. I mean, he's actually making an Office of Human Rights where he's going to probably institutionalize crazy stuff like the right for a man and a woman to have a child, or like the right. I mean, like it's so bizarre. But it really depends on who you're talking to. I mean, that's something that we have to kind of constantly realize and go back to. It depends on who you're talking to and what context they're using a lot of these terms. So, yeah, so like let's take example like this is where things get real interesting though, and this is why it's a really great time to be involved politically, because one of the things that Bernie Sanders is talking about, and now he's forcing other candidates on the Democratic stage.
He's normalizing it, and I'm really happy that he's doing that.
Yeah. He's talking about like universal health care, right? So he's saying we don't need for-profit insurance companies. We, as the government and as people, could do this ourselves, like every other civilized country. That's a great way to look at it. But what I'm saying is, why stop there? Why don't we do the same thing to housing with landlords? Do we really need landlords? Do we really need the big banks, issuing mortgages and then dying out and then basically having to be bailed out by Obama and Trump? I mean, the housing and banking industry is sick. It's sad, and it basically caused the 2008 recession. Do we really need to keep going down that path? Look at like big agribusiness. Do we really need big agribusiness like Monsanto or Bayer? Like, is that really something that we need? Can't we just have local farms and have governments, help coordinate farmers markets or food hubs like they have in Canada? Just start thinking along those lines a little more. Why don't we have a guaranteed right to food? Why don't we have a guaranteed right to a shelter? And why don't we have a guaranteed right to even clothing? Even like we just don't think about this stuff. And we sort of have a guaranteed right to an education in this country, but we don't have a right to equal education. So that right there is sort of, the way the capitalist regime looks at stuff. We kind of have a right to an education. There's a public school wherever you are. If it's a good public school, sort of depends on where you're born. Sort of depends on the color of your skin. Doesn't really depend on much more than that. So it's I think the socialists kind of look at the world as saying like, there's a lottery when you're born. If you're born into a rich area, you're probably going to do pretty well. If you're born into a poor area, not going to be so great for you. They kind of want to undo that lottery and make things more equal and on an equal playing field. And obviously, a lot of capitalists oppose that idea. But what I always kind of say to younger folks is, look, we are in a revolutionary moment because how our parents did is not really spelling our outcomes for how we're going to do. I mean, my parents, when they went to school, when they went to college, they were courted by big companies for really high level jobs right away, like right out of their bachelor's, master's degrees, or beyond. They were courted by big companies. Us, we have straddled with debt. It was so hard to get into the door of any kind of company. Companies are kicking us in the teeth and constantly laying us off. There's no loyalty anymore. I'm not going to retire with the same company I start with, but my parents kind of had that situation going on. So I think that, I'm telling folks that now is the time. Your economic interests are more aligned with the average poor person who might need public housing, who might need a Section 8 voucher, who might need help, with their car payment to get around, than they are with your own parents. That's sort of the economic reality we live in. Mm-hmm. And I think with climate change on the table, we've got a really interesting turning point here. We can keep going down the same path and keep hoping that economic times get better, or we could say it's time to change everything. It's time to really look at the way we did things. And obviously with climate change, with corporate polluters, with the way we keep, destroying the planet, coupled with the fact that we're not really making sure everyone has access to the things they need to live, can't we do better? Can't we go to a better system? And that's where socialism comes into play.
Wow. Yeah, I think you made a really good argument for that there. And yeah, I think the sad part about this generation, my generation, I think I'm a count as millennial. I'm 25, so yeah, probably. Yeah, how old are you, by the way?
35.
Oh, okay, cool. 34. Yeah, so the thing with this generation...
I'm the oldest millennial.
Say it again.
I'm just on that edge of being a millennial. My
Okay, you
friend.
still count.
Yeah.
The thing with this generation, and it's really depressing, is that I'm sure you've read the statistic about like record high suicides and drug overdoses and stuff,
Yeah.
and you wonder why. It's because there's no hope. Like it's really hard to stay optimistic. Like you come out of college in debt. And then you
Yeah.
think, well, why even try to make something of my life? Because scientists tell me that the Earth's going to be, approaching an apocalyptic wasteland in like 50 to 100 years. It's like you start to think, you get really nihilistic. It's like, what's the point, right?
I know.
So that's
Yeah.
why I hope to see, and you're right about how it's a pivotal moment in
Yeah.
U.S. politics and honestly the world, because now is the time where if we either act or we don't. And the people now that are denying things like climate change and denying things like socialism, if I'm predicting correctly, there's going to be history books like 100 years down the line, and the people now that are opposing these changes are going to be seen as the villains, and then the people that are for them and fighting for them are going to be the heroes. This is going to be a generation that changes the world, or the world is going to just end, is how I look at this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, as a socialist, and who was like kind of trained, I guess you could say, in the Marxist tradition, be careful because capitalism is real sneaky and it'll always kind of, like
It's always going to come back. Yeah.
it's always going to come back. And I think there's something else worth pointing out too, is that I'm not just a socialist, because when I came to Baltimore, I started getting very involved with groups that were doing some really great organizing here. And one of my mentors is my campaign manager now, Reverend Annie Chambers. And she's a former Black Panther, and she never really stopped struggling. She never really stopped fighting oppression and standing up for her people in East Baltimore. And she sort of trained me. And, I mean, a lot of the great ex-Panther quotes, like there's one that's like, the media will have you hating the oppressed and loving the abuser. I mean, that's so like Donald Trump's MO.
Yeah, and
I mean,
that goes back to like my favorite quote
yeah.
from Jimmy Dore that I always say to people is like, why would you blame the people with no money and no power for your problems? Because that's what conservatives tend to do.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, look at the border situation right now. I mean, to the idea that like folks with literally nothing are coming into the country and like using all our resources and our jobs is completely insane. They have a universal human right to exist. They can't go back to where they came from. They're bringing their whole families here. They have no possessions. It's not like they have a house waiting for them back in Guatemala. Like, that's just really ignorant to think that. They have nothing, and they're risking everything to cross the border and now to wait in a concentration camp, basically, to try to get a piece of the pie. I mean, but that's sort of the biggest fallacy of capitalism, is that, you got to keep working and fighting until the day you die to get a decent standard of living for your own children.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you see a lot of younger folks that are just like, what future, what children, what family? I'm not gonna raise, yeah, you're right. Like, suicides are on the rise, and a lot of folks are just deciding not to start families either. And in this economic reality, I really can't blame people.
Yeah.
It's not like I don't want to bring a kid. Like, it's always, you never know when something bad's going to happen in the world. It's more like, I think the older generations expect too much. I mean, they're like, okay, have enough money to take care of your family. Okay, well, I don't. I can't find a job that will pay for that. Okay, but when are you going to get married and have a family? It's like, what are you talking about? I just told you, there's no job, there's no money. I can't do it. Like, get lost. I mean, this is seriously where we're at. And I think we've got to really think about reforming society and changing the economy. And that's sort of my number one issue, is that we always take for granted the way our economy works. We're always like, okay, the way the economy works and the way that you make money is always going to be the same. And, that's sort of my one critique of reform socialist. I'm not saying that Bernie Sanders is saying this, but I am saying that, like, I don't want to see a world where we just think of making, like, I don't want an Elizabeth Warren style world. I don't want a world where we're just
proud capitalist over there.
Yeah. Well, it's not just that. I don't want someone to think that, like, just by reforming the banks or by making new laws to stop bad guys that you're going to fix everything. I really don't think that's the issue. I think you have to fundamentally say, why don't we have a right to housing? Let's make a right to housing. And if you're a rich capitalist or even if you're some like petty landlord, sorry, you may have to lose your property in order to make sure that we can put people in it. But in the end of the day, if we have socialism that actually says everyone gets a right to housing, including you, then, I mean, what do people have to lose?
Yeah, you're not losing. Yeah. And, obviously there's the fear mongering that everything goes down in quality if you do that and yada, yada. And how would you respond to that?
I mean, this is so interesting to me when people say stuff like that. I'm not saying you are.
I'm just presenting the the opposing case.
Yeah. I mean, I think people really have to kind of see the world a little more broadly, because you come into any like urban area and like such a high percentage of it is dilapidated buildings or area that's just gentrified or totally inaccessible to anyone but the wealthy. And okay, let's take this for example. If you're saying that Citibank buys up your building and then makes it really, really nice, your apartment building, let's say you live in an apartment building, and then charges you $300 more for the rent each year until you can't afford it anymore, I mean, sure, this building's going to look really nice. Thank you, Citibank, for putting my building together. But I'm not going to be able to afford it. Yeah. So, what is the point of that? And, I don't think people can even imagine a world, because I think we're so ingrained to think socialism, it's like communist Russia. It's going to look like everyone.
Word at this point.
Yeah, everyone's going to be, forced into shitty housing and everyone's going to, drive the same crappy car. It's like, well, everyone I know has trouble affording a car, or unless they bought one used and it's really shitty. So, maybe that, sharing a system of cars would be a better way to go about it. And then what's hilarious is, companies like Uber come into the place and, or self-driving cars come on the scene. And then the economists and capitalists kind of go crazy, oh God, are we going to live in a world where no one buys a car and everyone just calls up self-driving cars all the time, like taxis on demand? Because the reality is things change. They change. 100 years ago, most people were taking trains or ships, and now it's air travel or mostly cars. And
so I'm glad Oh, sorry. Do you want to finish your point?
Yeah, you know what? I drive a lot for the campaign, and you know what? We drive on a system of roads from the Eisenhower administration called the Eisenhower highway system. So that was the government making a choice that instead of investing in rail, they're going to invest in roads. And everyone drives on those roads now. If the government didn't make those roads, we wouldn't have them. We wouldn't be having such a car-centric culture that we have right now. And, so I don't think that's where we kind of lose folks, where people are like, oh, everything was just always like this. And it's like,
yes,
I get that, but it wasn't, it really wasn't. This stuff was built in our grandparents' time or before that. America is a very young country by comparison, and we can make it whatever we want. But the longer we stay asleep and say, oh, it just is the way it is, that's when the capitalists win, because they're making plans while you're sleeping.
So, yeah, you're right. People fall into that trap. It's called when things are grandfathered in, right? People fall into the trap of assuming that, capitalism was, descended from the heavens, created by Jesus himself. They don't think outside. Maybe, we created that. People that wanted to sell shit created that system. It didn't pop out of thin air. We can do better. We can change stuff.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm also, another thing you mentioned that I'm glad you did was the establishment's aversion to anything new, and they're always trying to hang on to the past. There's a question I wanted to ask you that I'm guessing doesn't get asked very often because it's kind of an obscure topic. Do you go on YouTube often, and have you seen how kind of the corporatization of it?
Yeah, I have, and I'll say this. I wasn't really a big YouTuber until the campaign. I'll admit that I'm a little later on this than I think some of your fans, but I've heard from a ton of independent media outlets that
Yeah.
YouTube has just become, I mean, just it used to be a way to make a decent amount of money, maybe not a living, but certainly a side hustle that you can reinvest in, and now it's just become nothing. Like it's just complete extortion.
So
I
here's my
mean,
concern, and I'm curious, like, if there was anything you could do policy wise for this. So it's not even just the money thing, and that is a thing. Like, people used to be able to make a living off of it, like use it as a job, and it was a beautiful place, honestly. But it's
yeah,
now you're getting things like they're pushing more, like they're kind of scared because as usual, the advertisers ruin everything. They're scared of like new voices, so they're only going to put advertisements on the new stuff. My concern is, as YouTube and the internet in general kind of becomes like cable 2.0, like, I'm worried that those like outside voices are going to get constrained yet again. It seems like this happens a lot, like when TV came along, I assume radio was very like, no. And then now the internet, it had its like 10, 15 years of like newness, and it wasn't like controlled and constrained, but now it's beginning to be constrained. And my worry for future generations is, me specifically, I would have never gotten into politics if I hadn't stumbled upon alternative media like Jimmy Dore, the Young Turks at a time, Secular Talk, Humanist Report. These people, I would have never even known about, the outside the bubble of the establishment thinking, right? So my concern is, going forward, if they continue to just bury these alternative, ideas under their algorithm or whatever, we're going to return to a place where we're back at stage one. And I think we're in a very pivotal moment here, because the internet is just now kind of becoming to be censored now. Like, we had this, that let's be honest, Bernie rose up because of the internet. It wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the internet, because he got next to no coverage in mainstream media in 2016. So I guess my biggest concern about censorship on the internet is that right now the internet is kind of our bastion of free thought and different ideas and outside the bubble thoughts and stuff. So what would you do? First of all, are you concerned about that? Second of all, what would you do policy-wise, or if you could do anything to kind of prevent that, or maybe make more of an open space for ideas and stuff like that?
yeah, those are some great questions. I mean, so first of all, yeah, I am really concerned about this. If you would have asked me even 6 months ago how concerned I was, I think my concern has really gone up. I've just seen a lot of censorship and a lot of just very strange algorithmic behaviors. So, first of all, I think it's really important to understand that the internet. Okay, so the internet's been in phases now, right? So I think it's really important to kind of go back a little bit, because people often really lose sight of this. Now, I'll start now, and maybe I'll work backwards. Maybe that would help folks. So basically, right now, you have a system of just complete exploitation, just total exploitation. And what I mean by that is, when you put anything on the internet where you like mumble near your cell phone, or you take a photo, or you put something on Facebook or on Twitter or on YouTube, like basically Google or whatever company you've used is extracting every single little bit of information out of what you put up there, from like the books in the back room to the books behind you, people in the background, facial recognition stuff. I mean, it's really quite scary what they gather now. And they're totally lying about what they're gathering too, which is also very scary, because they're moving so fast that they can kind of like maintain deniability. Like when Mark Zuckerberg was saying your phones aren't really spying on you, turns out they kind of were, just through a third party, so he didn't really have to say much about it. So anyway, I mean, the reason I bring this up is because they are making money off of you every second of the day. I think people got really scared about the aging app, that face app that would make you look older, and then all your data went to Russia, and Russia's a big boogeyman, so let's get concerned about that. But reality is that every site has been doing that for a really long time. If you take a picture of a newborn baby, Google instantly processes it and says, like, hey, we noticed there's a baby in your timeline, and do you want to share it with all your friends? Like that's the kind of new normal. And what Google's not telling you is, we've already processed the picture of the newborn, and we're going to use that for decades and use that for like information research and AI research in the background, because you can't really stop us, because unless you want to become a Luddite and not use any smartphone at all, you can't really do anything about this. So they are literally making money every single time you put a photo on there. Every time grandma puts a photo up, I mean, they're making money off of your grandma. I mean, it's kind of that simple. And they're not giving you a dime. They're not giving us any penny at this at all. They're completely just taking it and they're just using it for themselves. So, right then and there, I think that that's incredibly unfair system. I think that, tech companies should be forced to give a part of their revenue back to users, especially if they're going to just exploit us like this without any kind of recourse. Okay, so that's kind of where we are, right? And the AIs are getting, and the monitoring. So if you go back to 2016, Bernie was sort of a breakout success out of nowhere. No one really saw that campaign coming, especially because he was independent before that and not even a Democrat. And I think with Bernie's success coupled with a couple of other kind of really interesting anomalies, like the success of certain like Jill Stein memes and the success of other things, there was this real like instant like, oh, this must be the force of an outside country, so we should try to immediately like put in all these different stopgaps. So if you're kind of an outsider and you start making some really awesome memes, Facebook's probably going to shut you down.
You must be a Russian bot.
You're not really supporting Biden. Exactly. Like that is literally the way that kind of Congress is kind of pushing them to go. Like they want that immediate stopgap measure for these non-mainstream candidates. They want predictability in politics. And if you keep going, so I like to go back a little bit further than that too, because I think this is really important to remember. There are tons of documentaries if you look up like the foundings of the internet, and I really encourage your listeners to look some of them up. So like back in the day, the creator of Unix, like famously, back when the internet was just a couple of different colleges all linked up, there was a free software society was one of the first things that started. And basically by free, they meant that anything that was written, any computer code written for the internet, was something that should not be for sale. It should be open source, accessible to everyone, and everyone could build on it. This is sort of the ethos of the way the internet was started. And then a man came along whose name was Bill Gates. And Bill Gates famously wrote to these people that made Linux and Unix and said, hey, I want to be a billionaire. I want to make money off of the internet. I can't wait to build an operating system and charge people for it. And please, please, please let me do it. Like grant me an exemption and let me make my code private and proprietary. And of course, he just went on to do it himself, because and that's basically how we got started down this road of like complete selling off of the internet, which, at one point in time, I think was started to be a public good, to be open source. So that's a very abbreviated history. I'm sure I'll get some internet nerd out there who's like, that's not, it's fast enough. But like, I can't give you, like people should really go take a look at the origins of the internet and the way it was made, because it was really started as a free cultural project. And I think folks back then were anticipating some of the things that we're seeing now. Like, for example, if I take a video of Darkwing Duck and I mix it with some, I don't know, Interpol music in the background, and I upload that to YouTube, instantly YouTube is going to take that down and be like, nope, you're not a creator, you're a fucking pirate. Screw off. Maybe we'll come after you one day. Like that's their attitude, right? But if some big time a Hollywood producer buys the rights to both of those things and mixes them together, they're considered a genius. And there were folks that, back in the founding of YouTube where there wasn't those kinds of restrictions, and there was sort of this like free culture mentality. Like there actually used to be a pirate party in the U.S. There still kind of is a little bit, but the pirate party is really big in other parts of the world, like in Iceland. And basically they have a free culture mentality, which means that if you create something, please keep it free, because someone else can build on it and make it better and make your universe better. Yes. Like you could. Why are we secular, closing everything off just for the profit, for your particular family? It belongs to everyone once it's out there. Maybe someone will come along and improve it. Maybe someone, like maybe some kid like in high school, mixing one of your songs has a right to be heard. And just because they hear your music all day and they love it and they want to remix it doesn't make them a pirate. It makes them a person that's a creator. And so that's kind of the ethos of like the pirate party. And actually, once upon a time, I was part of the pirate party, when they were trying to get off the ground in the U.S. Yeah. So I just, I'll leave it there. but there's a whole history here, and basically because we didn't go down that path of making the internet free, open source, we're feeling a lot of negative consequences now, and I do worry that unless you get someone in office who's got some familiarity with the internet and a conscience, who understands this really corrupt culture of trademarking everything and locking it away and then penalizing folks for remixing it, that you're gonna, it's scary to me. It really is. As someone that grew up being able to make your own content, it's something that we really should be concerned about more. And I think there's something we could do about it. Of course, I'm going to say the answer is socialism, obviously, but also it's about just making sure that stuff is free. Like, content should be free. And even like you watch like Shark Tank with like Mark Cuban on it, he's even on there saying, as a billionaire, that troll farms and patent trolls are like completely ruining everything. They're squashing innovation. And so this is, I'll just end with this point because this is a really important point. Folks are like, oh, like the Ayn Rand typical like socialism's bad kind of argument, like innovation will be stifled. No one will be able to create anything in a socialist world. And it's like that's just total garbage, and techies know it's garbage. Because if I want to make a better, like electric car is a great example, right? Electric car has been around for years. Over and over and over again, companies have tried to squash it, get rid of it, like make sure it doesn't exist. No one knows about the electric car. There's documentaries about that too. And, if we lived in a socialist world, it would be as simple as like, which car is better? Which car is more fuel efficient, electric or gas? Yeah. Okay, we're going to go with the electric. Like, it's not that complicated, like, but because we live in capitalism and because there are big giant companies want to protect their interest in their patents. I'll give you one more thing, because I don't think your audience knows this, because my dad had to tell me this, because my dad's actually a techie. Back in the day, your phone, when you connected it to a phone jack, I'm talking like in the 60s or 70s, it had to be an AT&T phone connected to AT&T's network. AT&T literally said you cannot connect any phone into our network that is not AT&T. That was something that actually happened way back. And I think people kind of forget stuff like that. We don't think this stuff has happened before. And that's sort of the way I see things going now. Like, is your content for YouTube appropriate, friendly, and not going to ruffle any corporate feathers? Okay, then you can get on here, and we won't monetize you or give you any money, but we will make tons of money off of you. Like, that's sort of the way things are going, But we've been down this road before, and it's going to take really serious-minded folks to change things, and they have to realize what they're asking for, too, because power concedes nothing without a demand. So you got to know that we can't go down this path and that we can do it better.
Yeah, so you're right. So advertisers will always ruin everything, right? Like I watched the devolution of YouTube. I remember when there was not even ads on it, and it was just a very crazy place where anything went, and now it just feels so processed and just destroyed, What do you think about, I know Ro Khanna has something he's proposed called the Internet Bill of Rights. Have you looked into that?
No, I haven't. I've seen like crazy mixed stuff about Ro Khanna.
Yeah, he's one of those like Elizabeth Warren types where like, oh sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. He's one of those Elizabeth Warren types where he has good things, but then he does bad things. Like he's more on the good side when it comes to Democrats. But yeah, I would encourage you to look up his Internet Bill of Rights. It's I think it's a step in the right direction, but of course not far enough.
Yeah, there's definitely steps that we could take, and I think the folks should definitely get involved. And, I actually went one year up to D.C. for a net neutrality lobbying day, and it was a lot of fun. I got to network with folks from around the world, so from around the country. So folks can definitely get more involved. I encourage it.
Cool. Another maybe question that doesn't get asked enough is like, obviously I don't know the countries off the top of my head, but there are countries that have like shorter work weeks, right? Like, I don't know them off the top, maybe you do, but like countries where they work maybe like a 4-day work week or a 3-day work week. You see something like that ever becoming possible in the United States?
This is a great topic, okay, because a lot of those countries that shorten their work week, it's actually like socialist and capitalist finding that middle ground as to why they should do it. So, for example, like maybe unions and socialist want to see a shorter work week so people can have better quality of life and don't have to work themselves to death. But then there's a lot of companies, or a lot of capitalists, rather, I should say, and economists that are saying, well, if you limit a company to only being able to let someone work for 30 hours a week without taxing them or making them pay overtime, that's really what that means. It doesn't always mean you literally can't work extra or they'll get thrown in jail.
Right,
I know
of course.
Capitalists throw that out there. It's not. The economist argument and the economist or capitalists say then someone has to be hired for that extra 10 hours that company has to be open. So now you're not employing one person, you're employing two people, one full-time, one part-time. And that increases the economy, it grows the economy. Now another person has a job, maybe a person trying to break into an industry. Now they'll have a part-time job and they could work up to being a full-timer eventually. So, I mean, in so many parts of the world where they do these kind of really awesome and interesting policies like shorter work weeks, it's really because there's an economic advantage even to a capitalist. Most countries that almost every country that actually gets universal health care never goes back. They never say, you know what, universal health care, everyone being insured and never having to worry about insurance again or paying into that, that didn't work out. We're going to go back to private health insurance. It never happens. It never happens. Once you actually do a policy that's socialist, even capitalist economists are like, hey, we're actually saving money. That's the Bernie Sanders argument, right? It'll save us money. So it's really interesting when you actually start to go down and look into some of these other countries around the world and how they do it. And then the interesting coalitions that exist, because, I mean, in some areas of the world, it's not just socialists that are like, yeah, this is a good idea. It's even folks that are just reading statistics and data saying, yeah, people biking to work isn't just a better, for car exhaust. It also makes them happier. It also, they could, commute less, it's less time on the roads. It's less time we have to spend building more road and maintaining more roads. So, I mean, there's other parts of the world where planning or government planning and trying to actually help people's lives isn't seen as a bad thing. It's actually seen as innovative and even cost saving. So, and saving money isn't really what socialism is about. Right. But, the progressive capitalists, that's what they care about. So there's a lot of middle ground there that I don't think we really talk about ever in the U.S.
Interesting. So have you ever seen the show Adam Ruins Everything on True TV? Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard of it, and I've seen maybe one episode.
It's pretty good. He had an episode that was talking about the 40-hour work week and how it's such an antiquated concept, and it's from a time where, only one person worked, so you had to work that much to support the family. And then as well, most scientific studies show that, when you work that much, that at least those long days or that many hours in the week, you end up kind of getting so tired that your work proficiency goes down anyway. So, honestly, like you said, the capitalists are losing money because they're overworking us to the point where we're so tired. And I think I don't remember the exact number, but he said, your IQ points will literally go down because you're so exhausted by the end of the week.
Exactly. Your quality of life is less. And I actually think that the world is slowly moving into a direction. Well, I mean, for a little while there, it seemed like we were moving into a direction where we were going to get some better quality of life proposals because it just made more economic sense. There was napping in the workplace. That was an interesting phenomenon for a while. Daycare in the workplace, which would be fantastic for young families. I mean, Head Start programs propping up where they actually would get kids into school earlier so their parents could go work earlier. All these kinds of programs were being talked about for a while. I sort of feel with the Trump administration sort of attacking a lot of them, some of these ideas have gone away, but the economics behind them haven't, right? So, I mean, that's sort of why we still have Uber. That's still why we have Instacart. There's all these different ways that you can make money in the gig economy without necessarily having that full work week. And it's because it's just a lot of folks that are I know a single dad. He just cannot work a typical 9-to-5 job. He's got to eke out hours here and there to support his family. And so things are just changing, and the world has to keep up. And this is another sort of reason why I just don't think that traditional capitalism really stands a chance. I mean, you could definitely mix it up a little bit and have some integrated progressive policies in capitalism, But I think that ultimately we've got to go to a world where we're actually accommodating people first and families first, instead of just trying to, think of this antiquated 1960s, like, your dad's thing, your dad's method of socialism, that kind of, or capitalism.
Yeah. And even like I have a conservative dad, and even he like talks about how when he was growing up, his teachers would tell him, "Oh, in the future you'll be working 20-hour work weeks because productivity will go up so much and you won't work as much." And what ended up happening? Productivity went up. The American worker makes more money makes more profit for people, but guess where all those profits went? Into the CEO's pockets. CEOs went from making 50 times more than the average employee in the 80s to 250 times more now. So what happened is you make more money for the people you work for, but they took all that extra profit and make you work the exact same amount.
That's such a good point. And there's a lot of economists, there's a lot of socialist economists, even Marxist economists in this world. And you don't ever hear them on mainstream media, but they do exist in like colleges and stuff like that. And they talk a ton about this because it's getting to a point of just sheer absurdity. And the folks in Silicon Valley kind of recognize that. Like, they could literally make a bot and employ maybe one person to write code, and that bot could probably be way more productive answering phone calls, or I don't know, like making art, or figuring out how to drive cars, or figuring out the best routes. And that was all done by a person at one point in time. So the level of productivity per person has skyrocketed to the point where even like traditional economists are like, are we going to get to a point where if you own a piece of AI software and a really good computer and you're able to make a ton of money, you're just going to be a billionaire and everyone else is just going to be screwed? Mm-hmm. Like, that's sort of why you're seeing folks talk about basic income guarantee.
And I'm glad that was going to be my next question, so I'm glad you led into that.
Yeah, you want me to just go for it? Or
I'll word it real quick the way I was going to word it. So some people talk about, like, the need to kind of, have you ever heard the concept where it's like everyone kind of like gets a robot, and then like each person gets assigned to that robot, and then whatever profit that robot makes, you get? I've heard versions like that. Obviously, what's up?
Yeah. I have heard that, yeah.
Yeah, and then obviously Andrew Yang has a version, which I was going to ask you, obviously, your differences of opinion with him, which obviously he takes a more libertarian view on that. But yeah, I think even capitalists have to realize that something like a universal basic income is necessary, because if not, who's going to buy their stuff, right? Because that will literally collapse the economy if we get to a point where automation takes all the jobs, and then the middle class just completely disappears. The middle class is like the stilts that holds up the entirety of the economy. They can't be rich without the middle class. So yeah, I mean, it is a necessary thing. And in case people watching don't know what universal basic income is, the idea is you would be getting, an income just for living, right? And that seems crazy at first, but like one of my favorite quotes is, how badly did we have to mess up in order for robots taking our jobs to be a bad thing? In a perfect world, that'd be great. Oh my God, robots are going to do the work, and we can spend more time with our families. We can spend more time traveling. We can spend more time on hobbies. But no, in this world, robots taking your jobs is a bad thing, because we've made a system where we can't just all collectively come together and share this wealth, and have everyone have a nice life. Because now in this world, robots taking our jobs means that money's going to go into the pockets of like 2 or 3 people. So that's my rant. What's your rant?
Okay, so this is a fantastic question. I'm really glad that you brought it up. So, like, there's hilarious video of, I think it's Elon Musk and some other, like, Silicon Valley bigwigs, mucking it up at some, like, expo, like, TED Talk type thing. And one of the things they're asked about is, like, what do you think of automation taking everyone's job? And they're confronted with these figures about increased productivity, and they get to the point and they kind of say, like, well, eventually the government may have to do something for folks that we just can't find job replacements for. And they're like, well, like, what exactly? And they literally say, like, I guess a basic income guarantee. So it's kind of hilarious. And now I think Elon Musk has finally actually endorsed Andrew Yang.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, so look, a universal basic income guarantee has been around for a very long time. It's a very, very popular, historically interesting program. And basically, MLK supported it. He famously wrote in one of his books, a time has really come to alleviate poverty through a basic income guarantee. Because if you give everyone enough money a month not to be poor, then they won't be poor. It's not that complicated. It's kind of simple, actually. There's been a lot of conservative versions of this because conservatives like the idea of getting rid of all of our social welfare programs and making them into one check and handing that one check out to every person in the country. So, my take on this is the socialist take. I want to make sure that everyone gets a basic income. I like the idea of $1,000 a month. It should be more, but $1,000 a month is a good place to start because I know that I could take that out of the military budget. And the military budget
That's a whole nother topic of how big the military budget is. I don't think people realize. I'll let you finish your UBI thing, but we'll go into that.
I'll just say, yeah, the military budget is $600 billion a year, budgeted, and it's way bigger than that. But we can get into that later. So if you take, 100, 200 billion of that, or 300 billion, I think was the estimate, half of that, put that into a universal basic income, you could do $1,000 a month without a problem. So that's sort of where we would get the money for a universal basic income. And basically that will be our way to alleviate poverty. And we would not end any of the social services, welfare programs, traditional welfare programs that currently exist, even though a lot of folks rightfully point out that they are terrible programs that are means tested. So if you go to social services office, and I'm sure someone listening has done this, it's a horrible experience. I have had to do it in my life. They make you jump through thousands of papers. I mean, now they make you drug tests and other kinds of terrible things. It's truly awful. So it's means tested. So universal basic income would be not means tested. That's what it means when they say universal. It means that everyone gets it. Everyone gets it. And you might ask the question, well, why does the millionaire need to get it? Well, because let's say the millionaire was getting their money from their family and then they were cut off. Like, you don't know that person's life, right? So let's just make sure every person in the country gets this $1,000 a month, and then we call it a day, and then we can make sure we can finally start to build from there and have a real safety net against poverty. Yeah. That's the way I see it.
So,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess I'll just say, so the other part of this that I find, truly interesting is well, I'll finish with the basic income part. I think that's more important. So essentially, for me, I work with I work with an organization called National Welfare Rights. And National Welfare Rights has been organizing for poor working class families for a really long time. And they've been for an annual guaranteed income is what they call it, but it's essentially the same thing. And, it's very difficult to get welfare in this country, but I really feel that adding a basic income would definitely be a way to alleviate poverty. And then if you ask each state and city to add to that even more, so let's say you live in New York City, obviously you're going to need more than $1,000 a month. Let's say you live in, Kings County, you're going to need more than that. So, you can kind of add in from that point. But I think to start with, at the federal level, $1,000 a month makes a lot of sense.
All right. So, just as an example, one of the things that I want to do the most, and I think socialism is the best way towards this, which is why I am a post-capitalist person, is I want to create a society where people can strive towards doing with their lives what their dream is, right? So one of my best friends does the art for this channel. She's a very accomplished artist, and she's trying to make a career in that, right? And that's obviously pretty difficult, she's considering moving to different areas where maybe that'd be easier, and she's she's nervous about, oh, do I gotta get a part-time job as a stocking groceries or whatever. I would love a world, or at least a country, where you can just kind of take your time and really be like, what do I want to do with my life? Because I reject that notion that Republicans use, that people would be lazy. I had to take a month off when I'd got a surgery, and by the end of that month, I was going nuts from how bored I was. People want to work. Not everyone, maybe, but I think generally people do want to work at least a little bit. I was the happiest in my life when I worked a part-time job at Big Boy, just washing dishes. I would go in maybe 2 or 3 days a week. I'd work maybe 15 to 20 hours a week. That was awesome. I had so much time. And, on my days off, I'd go hang out with friends. I would pursue hobbies. I would make videos. that is such a more ideal life than now. Now that I have a 40-hour full-time job, it's just like I feel like I have no time for anything. It's just whenever I'm even trying to sit down and relax, it's like, oh, well, I can't even relax because in the back of my head I'm thinking, oh, in like 2 more hours I gotta go to sleep so I can get up at 4:30 a.m. and go throw boxes off of a truck. It's just, so that's my vision of like a post-capitalist world. Would you agree? You think I described that semi-accurately?
Yeah, I think you did a great job of describing it. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that I mean, I think folks like I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say folks like us, we could see, like a science fiction, example of a post-capitalist, it's also called post-scarcity, by the way, society, like a Star Trek society, and be like, we could do this now. Like, there's really nothing holding us back from implementing the basic economic structure right now. People don't. It's so weird to me that people define everything by work, and I think a lot of older folks that do that are really just losing grips on the term. Because I have a 40-hour-a-week job, I guess you could call it that, and it's a good job. And I know, like, if I was to not answer customers' email at 2 a.m. if it's urgent, or not check my phone all the time, I would lose it. So most people that have quote unquote good jobs are literally tied to their work 24/7. If you have a bad job, like let's say you're working in a warehouse or working, customer service, then you're pretty much dreading going in because it's like a nonstop grind fest. And so it's really difficult, I think, for folks to even imagine a life where you just don't, I mean, and that's why countries like France have to do these like crazy things, like have laws that literally say you don't have to check your phone after you leave for the day, like because workplaces were exploiting it. And it's not even like, so many folks take this attitude, and this is where I guess I digress a little bit from Bernie, because it's not to me just about like billionaires bad. Like, yeah, billionaires are bad. Like, don't get me started on that. But it's really about the system, right? Like, we're raised from day one to think you gotta win. Like, you gotta be a winner in life. You have to get the house and the pool and the kids and the car, and like then you're the winner, man. Like, then you've made it. Like, you've been something. You're somebody now. And if you don't, you look at those people that don't, and you're like, why don't they have a car? Why don't they have a good job? Why don't they get an education? And it's like it's just a fucked up system. It really is. Like, no one's able to just be going to a different path. Like I feel like we've been arguing this since like the 60s or 50s even, like since the beatnik era to the hippies to now. We just haven't really ever stumbled on the answer. And the answer is that we live in a society that is based in scarcity. There's the idea that if you don't constantly work, you will fail and you will be homeless, or you will be living on someone's couch, like that's the ultimate the negative in our society that no one ever wants to get. And we just don't really think that it doesn't really have to be this way, that you go through different phases of your life. I have a really close friend and coworker who suddenly found himself as a sole parent. And he had a great job that was 8 hours a day, and now he's got to drop his kid off at daycare, pick up his kid from daycare, take care of all her clothing needs, cook, feed, all by himself. And, his job is trying to do the best for him and help him out. But, it's like, why? I mean, things happen in your life that you just don't really have time to explain or go into. You certainly don't have time to stand in a social security line, a welfare line, and beg for money if you don't even have time to get a job. So we just have a really messed up way of looking at things. I mean, I lurk in public housing quite a bit, and I can tell you most folks that are in public housing are either elderly or their families. They are moms, they're dads. Like at 3 o'clock, there's dads picking their kids off the bus and then getting them home to grandma, and they go right back out of work again. And it just doesn't really have to be like this. Like every single time that we deny someone the economic right to exist, just the ability to have enough to just sustain or even thrive and start to think about what they want to do in life, we're denying ourselves of another like Albert Einstein. We're denying ourselves of another Picasso. We're denying ourselves another YouTuber, like or another creator. And
Great
we
point.
don't know what we can make or have next. And with college, it's even scarier because you want to like, laugh at that and say, how many Picassos do we need? How many atomic scientists do we need? How many engineers do we need? Those things all cost an incredible amount of money in our current society. Like college needs to be free, and we need to give people the time to go through it at their own pace and learn at their own pace.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going to have a society where literally we don't have any physicists and scientists, and everyone's just running around trying to make ends meet, and we just don't evolve. So, I think, for folks like us, they kind of get, like I'm a big science fiction guy. I want to see society evolve and advance and enhance. I want to get us up on that Kardashev scale to that first level of, or civilization. I want to explore the stars. And I just feel like we're just sitting here twiddling our thumbs waiting for the world to explode, So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to go.
No, I think you put it really well. I'm not sure how much time you have, so I can get to my last question unless you want to keep going. What are you thinking?
I can go maybe 20 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. So since we tend to talk a while, so I think this last question will probably take us out. So one of the things that really earned my respect from Jill Stein, who for people watching was the Green Party nominee for 2016, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure this was her. She led a protest outside of one of the Hillary Donald Trump debates. She did do that, right?
Yes, she did that. Yeah.
Okay. And didn't she get like arrested or handcuffed or something?
Yeah, both times that she ran, she protested outside the debates,
Yeah.
and one time she was actually taken to like a black site where they didn't even tell her where she was, and basically made her wait till the debate was over, like she was some sort of national security threat instead of being a.
And then she came out afterwards, and I thought this was so badass of her. She was like, "The reason they arrested me is because I'm a threat. If I got on that stage, people would know that
Bingo.
there's a third option. There's an option other than these two buffoons up here, right?" So
That's yeah.
So what I wanted to ask you was, do you have any plans on, well, first of all, two-part question. One, in this particular election cycle, do you have any plans on like holding protests outside debates, increasing awareness of the Green Party, trying to get up there on that debate stage? And two, in a more broad sense, how do we move forward from here to increase awareness of things like the Green Party and just other options and destigmatize socialism?
Oh, sure. That's a great question. Okay, sure. So, I mean, I guess I can't say that I have any plans to
March, protest,
like, get arrested or something like that.
Well, I'm not asking you to go get it. I understand.
Yeah.
No, you don't have to do that at all. I
Yeah.
more just meant like, I wonder if you could hold like a peaceful protest outside a debate or somewhere. You don't gotta like storm it or anything, but you could certainly have a demonstration or something.
So, I mean, we've done a couple of different creative things so far. I was part of the United Auto Workers 600 and National Welfare Rights held a candidate forum without all the candidates. They invited all the Democratic candidates, and to be fair, I think Bernie and maybe it was like Biden tried to reschedule but just couldn't make it work. But the rest of the candidates just didn't even show up or didn't even have an interest. And I don't want to give a complete list because I don't know exactly who said they could or couldn't show up and why. But I did show up, and I was there for that. So that was a really interesting like form of protest where folks from like the UAW auto workers got to ask their questions and stuff like that. And I'm sure they're going to do something else similar to that. I mean, there have been a couple times. I mean, we protested outside of an ICE detention center in Baltimore, in the Baltimore area, where we didn't get arrested, but they were definitely not happy that we were there. I could say stuff like that. I mean, I guess I'll just tackle one of the questions head on if you don't mind. Like, I'm definitely okay with me personally, getting arrested if need be. I don't have any issue with that. Like, civil disobedience is definitely important. I would say that to your listeners though, there's definitely going to be opportunities to be in part of a group in your life. Maybe it's where you live, maybe you got to travel a little bit. Could be something like the climate rebellion, the Extinction Rebellion, the climate strike. Could be something like protesting the ICE detention centers, and it'll speak to you personally, and you're going to feel compelled. And just make sure you're with a group of people that you trust. I mean, in Baltimore, we take the streets all the time. Like if there's someone that gets killed, like a young usually black man getting killed in Baltimore City, for basically just looking at a cop the wrong way. I mean, we will like literally like groups of us will come out and protest and literally be on the street, and cops will be like, "Get off the street! What are you doing?" and get the helicopters out. But as long as you're with a group of folks, like it's usually just perfectly fine. Like taking the streets, the tactic that they did back in the '60s, and it's still practiced today.
It works.
You usually won't get arrested, to be frank with you, and usually, yeah, it works. It really does. Like seeing that, like there's a lot of folks that get pissed off about it. I completely understand. They're they're designed to fuck with your morning commute. Like that's the point of some of these protests, like what they just did in the climate strike in DC. Like they held an intersection in the middle of DC rush hour traffic. And yeah, if you're in rush hour traffic, you're going to get really pissed off and you're going to get angry. But just remember, there's a reason folks are doing this. They feel like their lives are personally endangered. They see people in their own community getting killed, and they don't know what else to do. Like this is where we're at. They're not just there because it was like an awesome King of the Hill episode, which sort of like says the opposite of this. Like they immediately protest and they don't write a letter, or they don't talk about it, or they don't ask faculty to do anything. Let me just clear up for anyone listening that every single time you see a protest in the streets, I can guarantee you they've written a letter to their council person, they've written to their congressperson, they protested outside the governor's mansion, they protested outside City Hall, and now they're at the point where the only thing left to do is to block the street to get media attention, because you're just not hearing about it. You're just not hearing about people that are protesting a particular issue. Like we've all forgotten about Flint's water crisis. Flint still doesn't have clean drinking water. And guess what? Baltimore City schools don't have clean drinking water. And Newark, New Jersey doesn't have clean drinking water.
By the way, I live in Michigan, about 2 hours away from Flint.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I actually have a friend who lives in Flint named Rebecca. So luckily she's not in like the really bad area. But yeah, that one hits personally. And I know this is just kind of an anecdotal thing from my life, but like I'm nervous to drink tap water. Like I literally like make a habit of making sure to like, buy like purified, filtered, yada yada. And it's stupid that I have to do that in the richest country in the world.
No, it's a real, one of the reasons I'm a socialist, not a liberal or even a progressive. I don't really call myself that, and I'll tell you why. It's because I want to define myself as being in solidarity with working and poor people. So when working and poor people tell me like they don't trust the tap water, and then it's discovered why, and then it's discovered that they were right, and like I'm going to believe that. I'm not just going to sit there and scold them and say, oh, tap water is always safe and clean to drink. I'm going to work with them to make their communities better. And that's something that I don't think there's enough of in this country. Like when I came to Baltimore, I started working with some socialists, and I got comfortable with the local scene in Baltimore, and now I regularly go down to public housing projects, and I work with folks, and I talk to them, and I tell them, I'm with the Green Party, we're not the Democrats, we're not the Republicans, and we can help you get elected in your own community. Because oftentimes there's a tenant council, there's a building co-op, there's organizations, there's a neighborhood association where folks can actually get elected, and then at that point in time, it's way more difficult for their local politicians to ignore them. And then some of these groups, like public housing, they actually have a direct line of communication with Ben Carson and Donald Trump in D.C. So if Ben Carson tries to raise the rent, these folks can actually say no, and they're on their local HUD RAB board right here in Baltimore, and we help get them elected in the Green Party. That's some of like the work we've done in solidarity with folks. And only then are people like, wow, the Green Party is not just this group of people that I see on TV every 4 years. They're actually people in my community that are trying to help us get a better life. Like, this is a part of the group that I want to be with. These are folks that I could be leadership in. These are folks that are going to work in solidarity with me and support me. So that's sort of like my current like way of organizing, my way of thinking. I'll be the first to admit I'm not really that candidate that's going to be doing some big flashy event. I'm probably gonna be like coming to your neighborhood, organizing with local folks at your local union or in your local public housing project, or dealing with some kind of crisis in your community. So it's something that I've really been struggling with to get better at. But I'm working with groups that that are supporting us, and pretty soon we're going to start to announce some endorsements. And I can tell you right now, we have some really interesting ones planned for Michigan and your area. So we're definitely going to be back and in your neighborhood and actually help organize folks and work with folks as part of this campaign, because it's about people don't know the Green Party, and I feel like that's a real travesty. And I think that when we run for president, oftentimes MSNBC, CNN will have us on, and they'll wag their finger at us and say, Jill Stein, you have no chance of winning. You're an idiot. Why
You're
are
the
you
spoiler
doing
vote.
this? Yeah. But hilariously, when Jill Stein ran for governor, when Jill Stein ran for city council, they never had her on TV, did they? All of a sudden, when she runs for president, they want to wag their finger at her. So that's one of the big reasons that I'm running, is because I want to make sure that when we get on national television with this campaign, that we could actually say, well, I may not have a chance of winning this cycle. Maybe you're going to vote for somebody else, but here's the work we're doing down ticket that I want help with. I want to help get Riley elected to Pittsburgh, the community school board. I want to help get Reverend Chambers elected to RAB delegate back in my home neighborhood of Baltimore. Like, these are stories that we can tell and relate to that show how we're growing the Green Party. Because people don't realize this, but the DSA was a fraction of the size it was now. And with first round of elections, they backed some city council candidates. Next round, myself included, even as a Green. Next round of elections, they got Lee Carter elected to State House, and then after that, they won some more State House victories, and then finally, in 4 years, they were ready to get AOC elected to Congress. So I think the Green Party could definitely replicate that and do that same strategy. And that's sort of one of the reasons that I've decided to run, and that's definitely the way my organizing style is. But the other part of it is that folks have been oppressed out there for years, and I think younger folks now are just seeing it. They're just getting it. They're realizing that the corporate machine doesn't really care about you. They're going to take your stuff. They're going to ruin your chances of making creative content and watching the stuff that you want to see. They're going to how many times have we well, I can't talk about that. But how many times have you tried to? There's some stuff I can't talk about. But anyway, I guess one of the things I really just want to say is that there's a group of folks that have been oppressed for a really long time, and I think younger folks are just now seeing how they're going to get targeted next. And so it's finally time for us to really stand in solidarity with groups around the country that have been fighting this battle for a long time. And I'm here to help make that transition. I'm here to get us all working together on the same page. And I think the time is now, and I think it will really be a positive revolutionary force in this country, even after the campaign's over.
All right. Well, I think that's a really good place to wrap it up. I have one final real quick. It's like a selfish question on my part, and it's one day I want to run for something, probably like in my 30s or something. It's a dream of mine. Now that do I have some connections with you? Would you help me out?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
I don't mean it doesn't need to be you specifically, but like I more mean like in the future, I could shoot you a Twitter message like, "Hey man, I'm gonna run for something. You put in a good word,
No, yeah, well that's sort of the thing, right? I mean, it's I mean, I think capitalists have done this for a long time. It's who you know, it's not what you know kind of thing, and I think that socialists and progressives really have to start realizing that is, to build solidarity with communities that don't know you, you've got to put in the work and the face time, right?
Oh yeah, I wasn't. I hope it didn't come off like I was trying to be lazy about it.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm always happy to make that connection for folks, because it can be intimidating, going into a public housing project for the first time, or walking into your first socialist meeting, or knocking on a door for the first time for your first candidate. Those acts can be really intimidating. But I like the whole thing about my campaign is to make that easier and to start making connections for folks. So
awesome. Yeah, the last couple of years I've been trying to I've been volunteering for Bernie. I've been volunteering with the Sunrise Movement. yeah, you know, and like I said, my current plan is to go back to college at some point, become a journalist, try to be a actually good journalist, you know, work on that for a while, and then maybe, if things play out, run for something at like a local level. You know, I just think I look at people like Bernie, I look at people, you know, that actually like stand for something in such a corrupt system, and they are heroes to me. When I see someone like Bernie or you know, like you, for example, give a speech and you're so like, you're not censored, you're not held down by the system, like that gives me goosebumps. Like people like that I respect so much because they come out there and they're just a voice in that like corporate cesspool or pool, and I want to be that one day. So I really respect what you do, and I appreciate you doing this, man.
No, any I really appreciate you having me on. I love being on new channels like this. So this has been fantastic for me. And just remember, you know, Bernie started his political career as a third party candidate and then went independent, and only recently became a Democrat. So just want to leave that out there for your audience, because I think that, you know, if you've got to show folks why you're not just another suit coming up to them and smiling like everybody else, because that's the way it is. You know, like everyone will just be supporting Biden, you know, or Hillary, and really we've got to break out of that mold and really really in the left do this ourselves too, like really support each other and make sure we're not just giving in to that candidate that has the most money or the most name ID. You got to actually talk to people and see like who's been doing the work, who's been making the connections on the ground level, and, you know, connect with those candidates and then go from there.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw it. There was a tweet from Bernie a couple days ago, and he said, "If you think you don't know enough to run for local office, trust me, I know the United States Senate's you know enough." And I really liked that tweet. Yeah, that, not only is it funny, but I thought it was also really inspiring. Like I saved that tweet and I was like, that is inspiring. Like really, like I'm gonna hold on to that tweet.
I give a lot of credit to the folks that are willing to endorse across the board, and I know that Bernie's been part of some organizations that do that, like the DSA, and some other organizations that he created after the 2016 election. And, you know, so it's great to be able to say to me, to my supporters, who are mostly, you know, I live in Baltimore, so most of them come from the Democratic side, and they can now have a way to distinguish and say, oh, you know, oh, we're all part of this other organization, we're all with this socialist group, or we're all with this other, you know, independent group, and, you know, Greens are in it, and also socialist candidates are in it, because there's also a lot of independent socialists that run for office as well. I would even put Bernie in that more than I put him in a third-party candidate, say. So, you know, like, because he was an independent socialist for quite some time. So, you know, there's no wrong way to really run for office anymore. I think that that's being proven. There's no wrong way to be a journalist either. I'll just put that out there, too.
That's what I love about this new age, right? Like you can, the new wave is clearly going out there and being yourself. People don't want the prim proper, like I can go up there and just be myself and, you know, be loud, be bombastic, be unapologetically truth-telling, and that will gain traction in the era to come.
I completely agree. Yeah,
so thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, check out the website. Go. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll put your Twitter in the description and all that stuff. Whatever you want me to.
That'd be great. But people should really head out to Schlakman.com, my website, because you could actually add your own platform issues to my platform. So we have an open source platform where literally anyone can add an issue that they want to see that we're not covering. So if you feel we haven't done issue justice, you can type in what issue you want to see, and it'll be added right to the platform right then and there. And then, of course, we have like community managers that are managing that, so maybe you get asked some questions. But we want to hear from you. We want this to be about, you know, literally everyone, not just me personally.
Not a lot of politicians will do that, guys. Take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I want to see more folks doing this too. I think local candidates could definitely do this in their community too. So check out what we're using, and get with me if you want to use it for your own run when you run down ticket.
All right. Well, thank you so much, man. I hope we can do another call sometime in the future.
Anytime. Really appreciate this. Thanks
I appreciate it. Hey, good talking to you. Good luck out there.
All right. Take care, everyone.